You're listening to Fox City's Murder and Mayhem, your bi-weekly dose of true crime history in a small rural community of Wisconsin.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Fox City's Murder and Mayhem. I'm Eric.
I'm Gavin.
And Gavin, we are here again.
Yes, we are.
We are traveling where?
Well, okay. So I am not going to apologize for this episode. I am not going to say that I'm sorry for this episode. I think this episode is going to be great.
It is going to be great.
I think it's going to be one of the best episodes we've ever done.
Okay, but it's nowhere near the Fox
Not the Fox Cities.
Not even close.
Not even close. So we're going to be up by Lake Superior.
Oh, that's fine.
And this is a story that I ran across while just reading books and stuff, like you do. And it's not a well-documented story. It's not a story I had ever heard. It's a story that I would be willing to bet that our listeners have never heard. And I think they should.
And if I remember right, is this a mass murder?
This is a mass murder.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking at least a small demographic of our audience is really excited by the idea of a mass murder.
Yeah. So, I'm not going to apologize, even though I can't remotely claim this to be Fox Cities. There's not a connection at all. But it's Wisconsin history. It's something that I think people should know.
And it's a story you're going to hear nowhere else.
It's a story you're going to hear nowhere else, because I had to put this together, I had to pull like journal articles, because this is not well published. It's not online except in like bits and pieces. What I have here today is probably the most complete version of the story you're going to hear without really digging. So,
and when you say journal, what did you say? Journal?
Yeah, a journal. So like an academic journal.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Maybe this will make more sense to me.
Like professors have to write like articles in journals that nobody ever reads except other professors.
But why are they talking about a mass murder? Or is that going to be uncovered as we learn what the mass murder is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's not ask questions.
You have the wrong idea of what this is going to be.
Okay. Let's just get into the episode then, so I don't ask a bunch of dumb questions that are all solved by just hearing this story.
This is the Wisconsin Death March.
Okay, now this is really interesting.
Yes. Not my title. Title. This is what it's called, Wisconsin Death March. And we're going to start way, way, way back. This is an old story. Way back in 1848.
Holy crap.
Okay. So this is the Ojibwe or Chippewa people. I'm going to mostly say Ojibwe. When I'm quoting other people, they're going to mostly say Chippewa. I don't think that Chippewa is necessarily offensive, because it is still used today, but it's less commonly used than Ojibwe. So, I have no association with them whatsoever, so I can't speak for that. But I'm going to go back and forth on those. But just for people who don't know, they're essentially the same thing.
Okay.
So it's 1848. They're going to get their annuity payment. And the annuity payment is each year the government pays them a certain amount of money for land that they had sold off.
So some of the government did actually honor some sales of Native American land.
Oh, they
did actually pay them.
They did. Well, they pretty much were good about that, except that the amounts were not great.
Oh, so they paid what they agreed to pay, but the amount that they agreed to pay was just terrible? Is that kind of?
Well, yeah. I mean, it'd be things where like it was like 7 cents an acre or something. Like, it was... That's a whole other thing. Whatever. So, the 1848 payment, already at the time, the newspapers were calling it a swindle. The payment came later than it was supposed to come, which meant that when the Ojibwe showed up at the place to get paid, which is called the pay grounds, they were paid late, and they were forced to buy goods from traders at high rates on credit while they were waiting for the government to show up with the money. Because of this, 85% of the money they received was already spent before they received it, because the second they got it, they had to turn around and pay the traders.
Sounds like a scam to me.
Yeah. The traders took this lesson and began influencing ignorant frontier politicians. Not all of them were ignorant. Some of them were just mean. But ignorant frontier politicians to continue moving the pay grounds west, where traders could maintain their advantage during future annuity payments. This being, if you are a tribe who lives in Wisconsin, but your payments are increasingly moved west, you got to keep traveling farther where there's fewer people, except these traders who live in the middle of nowhere.
Okay.
After this swindle, a group of Ojibwe representing 16 bands of the Lake Superior region went to Washington, D.C. to plead their case that they should not be moved west, and they should not have to go west to get their payment. Like, we don't live over there. They presented their petition to Congress. Our people desire a donation of 24 sections of land covering the graves of our fathers, our sugar orchards, and our rice lakes and rivers at 7 different places now occupied by us as villages. They wanted places that weren't west into Minnesota and weren't north into Canada. They said, like, this is where we've lived forever. I love the fact that they've called out that their parents, grandparents, and so on are buried there. Mm-hmm. Like, the connection to the land isn't just, this is where we live. Like, this is our entire culture here.
Yeah, this is all of our family is buried here, and you're trying to push us out of it.
Yeah. Iowa Senator Augustus Dodge, to his credit, heard this. He explained it in his own words. And he said, they're coming here. They asked this of Congress. They want the resting place of their ancestors to be where they continue to be. This is a very fair request. He goes, furthermore, I think this is about the lease that we owe them. He goes, because if you look at it, here's what we've done. We've moved them off their land. We've taken the land that we got from them, mined it, received the copper and other metals from it, made guns and bullets out of it, and then came back and pushed them off the land with the guns and bullets we made from the metal of their land. Big credit to Senator Dodge. Like, not that people didn't know this, but I don't think they were so blunt about it. Mm-hmm. Where he's like, we're screwing them over with their own stuff. So he really pushes for them to stay. And he further, while he's there, he raises money for them so they can get back to Wisconsin from Washington, D.C., so their travel back is a little smoother. Seems like a generally pretty good guy. Dodge, in general, I should point out, like, he was raised out in the frontier. His father was a senator for Wisconsin, so even before he himself became a senator in Iowa, like, he had grown up in Wisconsin. So a lot of these politicians, like, they grew up out east and then they moved west or they got sent out west and they run into the natives and they're like, oh, this sucks. But generally the people who grow up there aren't quite as negative about it. Mm-hmm. So Dodge's pretty cool. On the flip side of that, we've got Alexander Ramsey. Alexander Ramsey grows up in Pennsylvania. But he's appointed the Minnesota territorial governor, and along with that, he gets to be the local superintendent of Indian Affairs. So he gets this job in March 1849. Underneath him is appointed Agent John Watrous, who is going to work directly with the Ojibwe. These guys are nasty guys. Okay. Nasty, terrible guys. I'm not going to say anything nice about them. They're nasty. Watrous is already unpopular in general because he has a tendency to switch his political party. He doesn't run for positions. He gets appointed to positions. And because of that, he's like, well, now I'm this. Now I'm this.
So whoever appoints him, that's what political party he is, basically? Yeah. Okay.
And like, it's a really smart move politically because if you want to be appointed something by the president, you want to be the same party as the president. So it makes sense. But it also doesn't make him super trustworthy because he clearly doesn't have any convictions. So they get put in place, and immediately they are like, all right, how do we get the Ojibwe out of Wisconsin and into Minnesota. All right?
Mm-hmm.
Because even though the Ojibwe are in Wisconsin, they fall under these guys in Minnesota underneath their watch of Indian affairs. And they want to move them farther west. Interestingly, they want to do it for the opposite reason that you usually want to do it. You know, normally the reason that Indians got moved west is because people move in, white people move in, and they want the land and whatever else. These guys want it for the exact opposite reason. They're like, if we move them farther west into Minnesota, what'll happen is we'll get some more military support, we'll get more religious funding out here, we'll get all this stuff that's going to have to come when all the people who've kind of built their economy around trading with the natives have to come into Minnesota.
Okay.
So their idea is, like, if we want to turn Minnesota from a territory to a state, we got to boost the population. How do we do that? We get all the white people that are attached to the Ojibwe to come along with them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Which also, if I'm not mistaken, pretty much the Ojibwe moved to Minnesota and they have the exact same problems because immediately now all these white people follow them and are going to be sitting there inevitably taking their land and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that wouldn't solve anything as far as that goes. So they write this petition and they write it and they don't say anything about that. Like the letters between them say like, oh yeah, we want to hear for the financial benefits. But to the federal government, they write, to ensure the security and tranquility of white settlements in the extensive and valuable district of this territory, we think that they should be moved, blah, blah, blah. So they're basically putting it out there that there's conflict between the natives and the whites. And obviously, you're not going to move the whites, so can you move the natives? And the federal government is pretty receptive to that. Federal government, up to this point, and I mean, people would say that from the beginning to end, the federal government isn't always like great to the natives, but especially around this point, they're so far removed from it. Like the people who are in Washington, they don't have a clue what's going out in the West. So when someone's like, oh yeah, they're constantly fighting with us, they don't know. They're like, oh.
You could whoever they're talking to basically could say whatever they wanted.
Right.
And the government's going to be like, okay. Because they don't know.
Yeah, and their obligation is to protect American citizens. Indians are not American citizens at this point. So you're going to do the thing that's good for the Americans. So it reaches President Zachary Taylor. Taylor consults with the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, and they do, in fact, write what is now called the removal order that got released in 1850, saying, yep, the Ojibwe have to move west. They give up their hunting and fishing rights to the Wisconsin lands. Sorry, guys, you got to go.
Mm-hmm.
Which was in direct violation to all the previous treaties they had signed.
Of course.
Because the land they were living on at this time and hunting and fishing on, like that was the land they were given to live on after they sold off their other land. Now they're being told to move, and they're not even getting anything for moving. They're just told to move.
Wow.
Yeah. The local people, again, to their credit, did not like this.
The local white people.
Local white people, yes.
Okay.
An Episcopal minister, a man named Cyrus Mendenhall, was present during some of the previous treaties. He had become friends with the Ojibwe, and he was pretty upset about the removal order. He got other people upset. Local politicians were upset. Even the Wisconsin state legislature got on to this and were upset. So they were all like, this is crap. Like, we don't have a problem with them. Whatever you heard from Governor Ramsey in Minnesota, we don't have that problem. And they're like, look at the last census. The last census came out in 1850, like right at this exact same time. They're like, nobody even lives where they live. the only people who live there are like the early French traders who had married into the family anyway. They don't want them to move. Those are like their in-laws. So they're like, whatever you're hearing from Minnesota is garbage. Like, these guys are... So credit to the people living in Wisconsin in 1850, both the local white people and the state politicians. And I'm not going to say that Wisconsin has always like been super nice to the natives, because that's not true. But in this particular case, they actually really came to fight on their behalf. So good credit to them for that. But then on the other hand, there were exceptions. There were some people, particularly the religious people, who wanted to see the movement go through. One was a Reverend Sherman Hall, who was currently stationed up at Madeline Island, which is where the Ojibwe were. And he writes to his superior, he goes, whatever we may think of this policy, the removal policy, if we wish to continue our missionary efforts for the Ojibwe, we had better conform to it. So he's basically like, I'm not going to fight here. If the federal government wants them to move, we want to go along with that. Because if we go with them, the government's going to buy us boarding schools. They're going to buy us a mission house. They're going to buy us all this fancy new buildings. If we stay here and fight, we're probably going to lose. And then we're stuck here with these buildings we're not going to use. He's not doing it out of any personal ill will. He's doing it from like, we want to get funding.
Yeah, financial gain, basically.
But it doesn't seem like...
Doesn't seem very Christian.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that necessarily, but like when his goal is supposed to be the well-being of the Ojibwe, like...
Seems like he's failing.
He seems like he's failing. He's more concerned with getting the funding than like looking out for them. So, I don't know. The Ojibwe, understandably, not happy about the removal. So, along with Mendenhall, the minister who is on their side, they send a petition out, and they get a lot of local people who are of influence, including politicians, to fill out this petition, sign it, send it off, saying, please don't do this to us. But it arrives at just the wrong moment, because President Taylor, who issued this order in the beginning of 1850, dies unexpectedly in July 1850. Petition arrives that the president is supposed to get sent to is dead, and the way things work is the government then has a complete turnover.
Okay. Everybody's
getting new offices and everything else as the new president's coming in. So the old Indian Affairs Secretary is moving out, a new one's moving in. The new guy moving in, like, he doesn't care about this petition coming in because he's got to work on all these other immediate, like, office turnover things. So it kind of gets set aside for a while. Mm-hmm. But, that's understandable. I'm not blaming that on him, but it's kind of timely. Like, they need this answer.
Yeah.
So the Minnesota Indian agents, Ramsey and Watrous, tell the Ojibwe that for their 1850 payment, they have to be at Sandy Lake by October 25th. And Sandy Lake is this area up north Minnesota, kind of by Duluth, but like not really by anything at this point in time.
Okay.
This is no small inconvenience. Some of the men traveled 450 miles by canoe to get to the paygrounds.
Wow.
They're really moving this. Which wasted time and resources, because October is the time where they're preparing their crops for the winter. The growing season is over. They've got a few months of Wisconsin weather they have to be ready for. But instead of preparing for it, they have to go out to Minnesota. The first group arrived in mid-October and didn't find Watrous anywhere. Nobody around was authorized to parcel out any goods that were on site. There was a small government shed type thing there, but nobody there could do it. They were told that Watrous was in St. Louis collecting the annuity money. Watrous was, in fact, on his way to St. Louis, but he was making no effort whatsoever to be on time. He reached St. Louis on October 21st, just 4 days before he was supposed to be back in northern Minnesota, knowing full well that the journey back could take him up to 2 weeks.
Jesus.
It's not like today. You can't get from St. Louis to Duluth in a day. By November 10th, so this is now after they're supposed to be paid already, almost 4,000 Ojibwe had assembled at Sandy Lake to receive the payment. But Watrous still did not arrive until November 24th, a month after he was supposed to be there. The annuity goods that were in the shed were then opened up and distributed, but mostly the stuff that was in there was like food storage. It was rotted. It was not good. While waiting for him to arrive, between 150 and 170 Ojibwe died from an outbreak of measles and dysentery. John Peetzel, who was an Episcopal missionary at the site, saw evidence of a terrible calamity everywhere, all over the cleared land. Graves were to be seen in every direction for miles distant from Sandy Lake. They were to be found in the woods. So alarming was the mortality that the Indians complained that they could not even keep up with burying their dead. As many as 9 Ojibwe died each day. Peetzel feared that there was even a cholera outbreak, although that wasn't proven.
Mm-hmm.
They had no shelter on site. There were no buildings. There was nothing. There was no shelter to protect from the cold. Water there was unsanitary. And like I said, what little food there was spoiled. So they hadn't planned on being there for over a month. So there was nothing there. There was just nothing there. Then to make matters worse, when Watrous finally did arrive a month late, he didn't even bring the money with him.
Come on, you have got to be kidding me.
He didn't bring the money with him. Trying to make the best of the situation, he negotiated between the Ojibwe and local traders for food and ammunition so the men could at least hunt on their way home. These supplies would be given on credit and later be paid from the owed money. Watrous assured the Ojibwe that he was giving them the most reasonable terms possible. This is maybe true, considering how isolated they were, but it was later determined that the prices they paid were between 3 and 6 times the rate of what they would have been if they were in somewhere populated like St. Paul. Governor Ramsey even estimated that the food provided them would last the Ojibwe about 3 days, which is not enough to get back home.
Because what was it? 2-week trip?
It could be. Yeah, I mean it's a trek. Packing up camp on December 3rd, approximately 200 sick men were left behind, with a handful of healthy men to care for them. Streams were frozen over, making the canoes impossible to use to get home. So instead, they were broken up and used as firewood rather than being carried, because why would you carry a canoe 400 miles? The snow was a foot deep in many places, making the journey back far more challenging than the journey there. During this walk back, which is now called the Wisconsin Death March, another 230 of the Ojibwe died. In attempting to control federal affairs, Watrous and Ramsey had actually violated federal law. They were not authorized to do some of these things that they did. Their job was just to show up and give out the money. Mm-hmm. They weren't supposed to change locations of places, delay things a month. This is like completely contradicting orders. Mm-hmm. From the top down. But Ramsey wrote to the Indian Affairs Commissioner. He said, well, far from famine or starvation ensuing from any negligence on the part of the government officers, the Chippewa received all that government was under treaty obligations to furnish to them, except for their money. And this, as everyone is aware, who is at all familiar with the thriftless habits of the Indians and the fatal facility with which they incur debts whenever opportunity presents, is usually all of it due to their traders. They received no punishment, and the following year, they continued to try to remove the Indians. Now, let me clarify, if that's not clear, what Ramsey's saying here. He says the only thing we were under obligation to do was pay them.
Which we didn't
do. And he goes, that was, that's on us, but we went down to St. Louis, and the money wasn't there, so, we tried. The fact that they didn't come prepared to eat and stuff like that, that's not us. We were not obligated to feed them. And then he has to go have this further jab that goes, we were supposed to give them the money, but everybody knows they just waste the money anyway.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
he writes it in kind of professional words, but like he's not being cool at all. I mean, he doesn't even have to add that in there. Like, anybody is familiar with the thriftless habits of the Indians. Like, it's not relevant to the point. You don't have to throw in there that, yeah, we give them money and they spend it right away. Like, whether that's true or not, that's not the point.
The point is you owe them the money.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what they do with it.
Yeah. I mean, and he's, I mean, like I said, that's a whole side issue. I get, like, that's a fair point as far as the payments aren't being used well, because there is a tendency back in this time for the traders to kind of hang around outside of the pay grounds and then immediately try to lure them in the second, like, they've got money and sell them, like, worthless junk. But that, again, that has nothing to do with whether they get paid or not.
No. And that actually makes sense, because I would assume at that point in time that I'm going to guess Native Americans didn't really have a currency. Am I wrong on that?
I don't know if they had a currency or not, but definitely I would suspect that at this time they're still not entirely familiar with, like, American, like,
yeah, like,
they get the concept of, you know, value and trading and things like that, but I don't want to misspeak and make them sound like dumb or something, because they're not dumb. But I don't know, because with the treaties, I've said this, I think, on previous podcasts, like, when the treaties are negotiated and they're like, we want so many acres and this and that, they don't have a clue what an acre is.
right.
And that's not their fault.
But it's because they never used that kind of measurement. And I would assume it's the same thing with the currency, is that they trade it. They didn't use some dollar thing to trade. They trade, hey, I'll give you a horse for a blah, blah, blah. That maybe I'm wrong, but that's my impression of the way.
I think by this point, like, they should be familiar with, like, certain values and stuff, because they have been living among the settlers and the Lake Superior area. So I think that they should be pretty familiar with it at this point.
But I mean,
but yeah, the whole thing is kind of,
the more you use currency, the more you, like, understand, you know, the value of it and things like that. Whereas you just give a person that's never touched money before a big pile of money, they don't really understand what that is.
But even, like,
and how to manage it.
Saying they're thriftless, which is basically like saying they don't save it. Where are they saving it?
Yeah.
Like, what are they going to do with it?
Yeah.
They don't got a bank.
Right. And
they're not going to just bury it. Like, what are they going to do with it?
You know, and I would envision, like, these traders probably think they're swindling them. But to the Native Americans, they probably look at what the trader has.
Oh, no. They knew they were being swindled. They knew that.
The Native Americans did?
Yeah. Like, I don't know if, like, originally, like, when they first, like, 100 years prior to this, they might not have known that. But by this point, they definitely know it. Because when they go to Washington and write things and complain about it, like, they'll even talk about how the traders will set up these dumb deals where they'll buy things from them, but in order to buy them, they have to agree to buy other things they don't want. Like, the traders will bundle things together.
Okay.
And they're like, we don't want that other stuff, but they won't sell to us if we don't agree to buy the other stuff too. So they're basically like buying knickknacks that they don't want. They know they're being swindled. So, whether they have a full concept of the value of money, they know that they're spending it on things that they don't want.
But the only way to get the things they want is to buy the.
You have to go through the traders, because if you're out in the middle of the woods, you can't go to a store.
So, but I mean, these traders are probably doing that same crap to everybody, I'm guessing.
Maybe.
You know,
maybe.
They're probably more extreme with the natives, though, because they can probably get away with it. I think
they're much worse to the natives, but I don't know. Maybe they're just mean to everybody. August 1851, so a year after the Death March, the new Indian Affairs Secretary has finally kind of caught up with his work, and he reverses the removal order. The news spread quickly by telegraph, and local newspapers wrote articles cheering. They were like, good, we get to keep our Ojibwe friends and family. the different bands of the Ojibwe met up at Sault Ste. Marie that summer, and had what was called a Jubilee, celebrating their victory. Like, woohoo! We finally didn't get kicked around. But the celebration was just a little too soon, because even though the federal government has decided that they weren't going to remove them, the guys in Minnesota just were going to ignore that.
And they were going to move them anyways.
Yeah. So knowing full well that hundreds of people had died just the previous year, Watrous wrote to Governor Ramsey, and he said, "It is my intention to delay, unless otherwise instructed, making the moneyed payment of the present year to the Chippewa of Lake Superior until after navigation ceases, which is done to throw every obstacle in the way of their returning to their old homes." So, to translate, he wants to make this late in the year again, October, November, farther out into Minnesota at a time of the year where the canoes aren't going to be useful. And not necessarily so that they die, but he's like, well, if they come prepared this time to be stuck out there for a month, maybe at the end of the month they'll just stay in Minnesota.
What a dick.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's absolutely. Ramsey did not tell him to do otherwise, so that he followed that policy. The Ojibwe did not fall for this, and they sidestepped this, and they went to an outpost at Crow Wing, Minnesota, which apparently was far enough out west that the Indian agents were like, okay, I guess you came into the Minnesota, so we'll pay you. But not so far out and not so isolated that they were going to get stuck in the same situation again. The Ojibwe wanted to be paid at Madeline Island, where they had traditionally been paid. Mm-hmm. But they found kind of a middle ground, and there was compromise. Because I'm assuming that I know that they know that the order's been reversed. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming that their motive here is to kind of put the Indian agents in a place where they're recognized, like, hey, you're violating the federal order here if you make us go any further. Mm-hmm. And then Watrous has no choice. Because as much as he wants to be a total dick about this and move them further west, he'll lose his job if he doesn't actually do the bare minimum here. Mm-hmm. So, good on the Ojibwe there for figuring out that we got to at least comply a little bit to get what we need, but we're not going to jump through his hoops, because we've read the newspaper where they've printed what
they're planning on doing.
What actually is going on, and yeah, we know what the rules are. The Ojibwe continued to resist removal with written petitions. They again sent a delegation to Washington. The Secretary of the Interior there, who oversaw Indian affairs, he didn't want to meet with them, but they hung around for 2 days anyway, saying they weren't going to leave until they met with the president. The new president, Millard Fillmore, said, okay. He found some time in his schedule, and he was apparently very impressed with whatever he heard from them. He said, the removal order was canceled. I will double down on that, and I will also personally say this is canceled. And he goes, on top of that, I'm going to approve payment, back payment, current payment, future payments. I'll try to reimburse you for some of your troubles. I will designate that it has to be paid out at Madeline Island where you want it. So Fillmore seems like he went along with this really, really well. And it helped that the petition they brought with him was signed by a number of Wisconsin politicians who Fillmore either knew or at least knew their names. I don't know that I want to give Fillmore 100% credit where he's like, oh, I'm going to help the natives. Or if this was a political thing because he's like, oh, my Wisconsin political friends want this. I don't know. But regardless, the outcome is he completely went on board with it and got things where they should have been.
So now the big golden question is,
yes,
did it actually stick, or did somebody up in this area figure out a way to, well, we'll just do this instead of what the government is telling us to do?
All right. It basically stuck.
Okay, that's good.
So Ramsey and Watrous had still not lost their jobs over this. And they still were thinking of ways around it, but they didn't get really anywhere at this point. In 1853, they were removed from their positions. So after they were gone, this kind of ceased. In 1854, another treaty was signed at Madeline Island. And this is actually a really big deal. This is like debatably the one part of this episode that I could say is Fox Cities related.
Okay.
And the treaty they signed in 1854 established reservations by Lake Superior.
Okay.
Prior to this, the land they were living on was not a reservation land. It was just land that they were told was okay to be living on. This established reservations. Now, obviously, reservations aren't necessarily great either. Like, I'm not gonna get on this podcast and be like, reservations are awesome, because that's not true either. But at this point, that was seen as the positive step, because once this land is designated absolutely 100% your land, you will not be moved again. Yeah. That was at least they had the relief of knowing we're going to be here as long as we want to be here now.
So they actually, do you know, is the Ojibwe, is this their original land?
It's, part of their original land. Their original land is obviously much, much larger.
Because they sold a big chunk of it off.
Yeah, if you look at like where they were living before people started moving into Wisconsin, they had a large part of northern Wisconsin and even up through like lower Canada. Their land is huge. So what they have now today, is a drop in the bucket. But yes, like the land that the reservation is on is part of that.
Which is, I mean, that's kind of nice, because at least they weren't one of these tribes that, like we've talked about on a previous episode, like the Oneida.
Yes.
Native Americans. They got moved all the way from New York.
Yes.
And wound up in Green Bay. I mean, how freaking horrible would that be?
Yeah. And the way like this, like I said, this kind of vaguely relates to the Fox Cities is 1854. This is when the government's like switching. The federal government is switching from removals and these treaties of buying off land to the reservation policy. 1854 is the same year the Menominee get their reservation and other tribes, nations get their reservation. And the Menominee similar. The land Menominee are on today is the land they got in 1854. Significantly smaller than what they started with, but it is part of the original land, which is kind of rare.
Mm-hmm.
So,
now, this might be a really dumb question, but I'm just curious. So, the way I see this is that, the white man starts on the East Coast, and then just kind of keeps progressing towards the West and pushing the natives further and further west and west and west.
Yeah.
Would you say, because all the stories we've talked about like this in Wisconsin, it seems like generally they get pushed, but they never really get pushed out of Wisconsin.
Not much.
So is this kind of like they pushed to Wisconsin and then finally the reservations came into play, and once reservations came into play, the natives stopped getting pushed?
That's fairly accurate, yeah. So to put that in context, Wisconsin becomes a territory in the 1830s, like I want to say 1836, and then it becomes a state in 1848. And the reservations come in 1854. So the timing works out well, where when Wisconsin is a young state, this stuff is going into place. And you got to keep in mind, like, to become a state, it used to be a really low threshold. I don't remember the exact numbers, so this may be off, but I think it's some ridiculously low number, like 30,000 people.
Okay.
So, like, the entire state of Wisconsin in 1848 would have only had 30,000 or 50,000 people. At that point in time, like, there isn't a huge push to push people out, because there aren't actually white people in the state.
And there's still a lot of land.
There's still a lot of land. And like I say, there's exceptions. I'm not saying Wisconsin's perfect. There's definitely exceptions. Like down in the southwest area, like the Prairie du Chien area. That was a whole mess because people moved in and they wanted the mining, the copper mining and the lead mining and everything else. And there were like actual miniature like wars going on down there over the land. So Wisconsin is not perfect at all. Like, I'm not saying that, but generally it did kind of time out where you weren't going to get pushed much further by the time Wisconsin came around.
And now,
and even that there's exceptions because like the Stockbridge who got moved from the East Coast to Wisconsin, some of them did by their own choice. Like they were given the option of kind of staying and sort of fighting politically or moving on to like the Oklahoma kind of area. And some of them did. Some of them did move because they were like, maybe this time they're being real with us. So some of them did move. But those that stayed and fought, like, they're still here. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
In a way, that's kind of an interesting piece of Wisconsin history is that a lot of our natives are actually the natives that were here.
It is, because that's sort of uncommon.
Yeah, and it's just an interesting little thing that, again, we don't really know that, but that's a neat little piece of our history.
Well, right, that's what I say. Like, this whole story, the reason I wanted to discuss it today is because when I ran across it, I was not aware at all. And like, not that I was like super shocked that like the government's coming in and mistreating the natives. Like, that's not a shock. I kind of know that. But for this, like the specifics of it, hundreds of people dying, and say what you will, yes, maybe they did do the bare minimum of what they were required to do. But it seems clear to me from the letters that Watrous and Ramsey were writing to each other, if they didn't actively do things to cause the death, at the very least, they just didn't care.
Yeah. Well, and they can say, well, we provided them with everything that we were supposed to provide them and plus more. But it's like, yes, but you were 30 days late on that.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I imagine in the dead of winter in Wisconsin in the 1850, 30 days out in the winter in a place where you don't have proper cover, blah, 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 is not a good thing for anybody.
No. So, yeah, that's the thing. I can't, not that I even want to, but I can't defend the Minnesota guys on this because they have to know this is what's going to happen.
And then let's just be honest, to say to the natives, again, we're in 1850, to say you have to travel 450 miles to get paid.
Yeah.
Get paid the money that we owe you.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Right.
And that, I mean, you are trying to kill people by doing that. You are saying that, well, if you want to get paid, this is how we're going to do it. And yeah, some of you are going to die, but we don't care.
Yes. So I've got one tiny little piece just to add a little happy note to the end of this.
Okay.
You ready?
I'm ready.
I'm being sarcastic here.
Okay.
All right.
I thought we were going to get a little up here, but no.
So John Watrous, the Indian agent who was directly involved in this scheme, he goes on to become the first Speaker of the Assembly when Minnesota achieved statehood.
Okay.
Alexander Ramsey went on to become the mayor of St. Paul. He then became the governor of Minnesota, a Minnesota senator, and then the Secretary of War. So for all their shadiness, they just keep climbing the ranks in the government. Yeah,
basically.
So Watrous was always a fairly low-level politician, but Ramsey, anybody who's like familiar with Minnesota, like you've probably heard, even if you have no clue who Alexander Ramsey is, you've probably heard the name because there's things named after Ramsey all over the state.
Mm-hmm.
But from my point of view, regardless of whatever good that he did for Minnesota, and obviously, like, he's there when it goes from being a territory to a state, so he did probably a lot of things to get them acknowledged as a state. He's still the guy who knowingly is trying to get people killed to get them moved and not paid. Like, that's not really forgivable. So it shocks me that there isn't more of a call to be like, Ramsey wasn't a great guy.
Yeah. Yeah. And this kind of goes back to like we talked about in the Marinette episode where the guy just keeps getting reelected no matter what he does. And this is, again, the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's just alarming and shocking that happens. But let's be honest, that it's not an 1850s thing. There are people that shouldn't be getting elected that are getting elected every day.
Well, that's probably true as well. But yeah, it's a shame. And I don't, I really don't want to be political. Like, I really don't. But one thing that we do is we do occasionally reevaluate history. And we say, these heroes maybe shouldn't be heroes. And these people we've kind of forgotten about maybe should be remembered more. And I'm wondering if maybe it's time to look at Ramsey again.
And say, maybe he's not such a great guy.
Yeah. And like, not to take away from all the good that he probably did, but, acknowledge it. Acknowledge it. Like, George Washington is never going to not be like the father of this country and all the great things he did. And he was the general during the War of Independence. I'm not knocking George Washington, amazing guy. But we at least acknowledge he was also a slaveholder and he did some other things that, in his time were accepted. But today, he had to probably know that wasn't okay. Mm-hmm. So like, this is not me saying George Washington is awful. Like, that's not what I'm saying. Like, we accept George Washington. But we know that he wasn't perfect. And Ramsey, I don't know that we've come to that yet.
Well, and do you think that Ramsey is just not significant enough of a political figure? I mean, he's huge in Minnesota terms, but even still, like, are they looking at a person from a state level politics and saying, is this really a good guy or just...
I don't know.
You know what I mean?
I don't know, but I'm throwing that out there. I'm saying, look at Ramsey, weigh his good and his bad, and don't throw him out. I'm not even suggesting like to not name things after him, but at least acknowledge that he did some shady crap.
Yeah. Well, he did some crap that got a whole bunch of people killed.
Yeah.
And for no good reason.
Yeah.
So well, not quite the massacre I was expecting.
Right. Yeah, well, that's the thing. When I say mass murder, you're assuming a guy comes in and kills people.
Well, okay, so when you started this story...
Yeah.
Where my head immediately went to is, are you familiar at all with the story of The Long Walk by Stephen King?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was envisioning. I'm envisioning that they have a bunch of Native Americans hiking to Minnesota and they're just killing them as they're walking.
I mean,
that's where it started. And
not exactly, but in a roundabout way.
It's similar. Yeah.
When you say, okay, you gotta walk your 450 miles home now. You've got 3 days of food and not enough ammunition to shoot wild rabbits and stuff. Like, you know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So, yes, this. Like, no, it is similar to that in a different way, but yeah.
There is I did find though that, and I forget the president's name that did this, but the last president that basically, fixed everything.
Yeah, and that's Millard Fillmore, and I don't know enough about Millard Fillmore to really give a broader analysis of that, but at least in that particular situation, I think he did the right thing.
He did the very right thing, and I applaud him for that, because I'm going to imagine at this point in time, that's not going to help him really politically.
Probably not.
That was him doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And I believe he said that there's a possibility that a lot of Wisconsin politicians may have been putting pressure on it, and that might be the only reason why he did it. But then, okay, good on those Wisconsin politicians for leveraging him to be able to get that to happen, because that was a good thing that they did and accomplished. So
yeah, and that's a broad story. Is the people? I'm being really general here. A lot of times what happens is when you have the natives and the whites fighting, whether it's actual battles or at least, political conflict, it's not their neighbors. It's the people moving in or the federal government moving in. The people who actually live with them and know them on a first name basis generally like them.
Yeah. Or at least have found a way to coexist with them. They might get annoyed with them and their cultures or whatever, but they're not like we need to get these people out of here.
Right. Yeah. So it's an interesting disparity and Wisconsin specifically was like founded on French fur traders, French Canadians who came down, intermarried with the natives, and for the most part, they got along. They respected them from day one. Mm-hmm. So it's different than people coming in from New York and Vermont and being like, oh, why are there people here?
Yeah, we got to get these people out of here and build buildings and stuff.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I think that's another good Native American story.
I think it's a great story. I feel like that was long, but it was probably worth being long. So.
Yeah, I think it was very worthy of long. I'm curious, is this a story that you do for, I suppose this is probably not something you do for the library?
No.
Because it's not local enough?
Completely unrelated to anything. It's just something that I came across while reading about early state history, and it wasn't something I could use for the library. It wasn't something I could really use for much of anything, but I was like, I gotta tell this story.
Yeah. So, well, for anybody who doesn't feel like there was enough murder or mayhem in that, we apologize for that. But I think
I don't apologize.
I still feel like it's a story that needs to be.
I don't apologize. If you don't think that's murder and mayhem, then
what is murder and mayhem?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
right.
If you want to come down on the side of defending Governor Ramsey, I mean, that's on you. I think you're wrong, but that's on you.
We're not saying Governor Ramsey is a bad guy. We're just saying...
I'm saying he's a bad guy in this case.
In this instance, he's a very bad guy.
Yeah.
So, do you have a little sneak peek into the next episode at all? Or?
I haven't firmly picked out what's next. I have some options. I have a list of at least 15 different things at this point. Do you have a preference of what kind of a story you'd like to hear? No.
I mean, I guess we've been doing kind of a little bit off the course stories recently, so maybe something very deep.
Everything on the list now is way more
murder, and
more Fox Cities specific. So, so we'll be back on track going forward now.
Yeah. So that would be my only request other than that,
Yeah.
We will just surprise everybody next week with 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe I'll tell the nun story.
The nun story has got me peaked, so that would be a good one.
Okay, we'll do the nun story then.
So, all right, with that, we'll wrap this episode up. We want to thank everybody for their continued support of this podcast, and we'll see y'all in 2 weeks for another episode.
Thanks for tuning in to Fox Cities Murder and Mayhem. Join us in 2 weeks for another exciting episode of Murder and Mayhem.
Hey there, fellow entrepreneurs. If you're tired of complicated domain management, I've got the solution for you, Hover.com. Hover makes registering and managing domains a breeze. Their clean interface and hassle-free experience will save you time and frustration. No upsells, no hidden fees, just straightforward domain services. Plus, Hover offers top-notch customer support. Make your life easier. Head over to krmpods.com/hover. Simplify your domain journey with Hover.